The room was quiet except for the faint hum of machines and the occasional rustle of papers being shuffled. Dr. Laura Bennett stood by the large wooden table in the middle of her lab, staring intently at the object lying before her. It was a coffin, simple, polished, and empty. Beside her, Ryan Carter leaned over it, adjusting a tiny device nestled carefully within its dark interior. Laura took a step back, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. She felt uneasy, though she couldn't quite put her finger on why. Maybe it was the coldness of the metal wall surrounding them, or the weight of what they were about to do. This wasn't just another experiment. This was different. It felt bigger somehow. "This camera better work," Ryan said, breaking the silence. His voice echoed slightly in the otherwise empty lab. He adjusted his glasses and gave the device one last look before closing the lid of the coffin gently. "If we mess this up, we'll never get another chance." Laura nodded slowly, her eyes still fixed on the coffin. "It has to work." She replied softly. Her tone carried a mix of determination and doubt. "We've spent months planning this. If there's even a sliver of truth to those reports, we could change everything. Everything we know about life, death, maybe even more." Ryan straightened up and turned to face her. "Or it could all be nonsense," he said with a shrug. But his attempt at lightheartedness didn't reach his eyes. He knew how important this project was, not just to Laura, but to science itself. They were trying to answer questions that had haunted humanity for centuries. What happens after we die? Is there really something beyond? They weren't the first people to ask these questions, of course. Philosophers, theologians, and mystics had debated them for millennia. But Laura and Ryan weren't philosophers. They were scientists. And unlike others who relied on faith or speculation, they intended to find answers through evidence. Hard, undeniable evidence. That's where Daniel Holt came in. Daniel was a volunteer, a terminally ill man in his late 50s who had agreed to participate in their study. He hadn't been easy to convince, but eventually he signed the consent forms. For Daniel, it was a way to leave behind something meaningful, a legacy that would outlast his physical body. For Laura and Ryan, it was an opportunity to test their theory in real-world conditions. The plan was simple enough, at least in theory. After Daniel passed away, they would place a hidden camera inside his coffin along with him. The camera was specially designed. It was waterproof, durable, and capable of recording for weeks without needing power. Once sealed inside the coffin, it would capture any activity, or lack thereof, during burial and beyond. What they hoped to discover was unclear. Perhaps nothing would happen, and the footage would show only darkness and silence. Or perhaps they would see something extraordinary, something no one had ever seen before. But now, standing here in the lab, Laura couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. Was this ethical? Was it right to tamper with someone's final resting place, to invade such a sacred moment with technology and curiosity? She shook her head, pushing the thoughts aside. They had done everything by the book. Daniel had given his full consent. Besides, if their experiment succeeded, it could benefit countless others, maybe even future generations. "Ready?" Ryan asked, snapping her out of her thoughts. She blinked and looked at him. "As ready as I'll ever be," she said with a weak smile. Together they wheeled the coffin out of the lab and loaded it into the back of a van. The drive to the cemetery was long and silent. Neither of them spoke much, each lost in their own thoughts. Outside, the sky was gray and overcast, matching the somber mood inside the vehicle. When they arrived, the funeral service was already underway. A small group of mourners gathered around the gravesite, heads bowed in prayer. Laura saw, and Ryan hung back, watching from a distance. They didn't want to draw attention to themselves or make anyone uncomfortable. Their presence here was supposed to go unnoticed. After the ceremony ended, the coffin was lowered into the ground. Laura watched as the dirt began to cover it, layer by layer. Each shovelful seemed heavier than the last, not because of the physical weight, but because of the implications. Beneath that soil lay not only Daniel's body, but also their hopes, fears, and unanswered questions. Once the burial was complete, the mourners dispersed, leaving Laura and Ryan alone. They waited until the area was completely deserted before heading back to the lab. Now all they could do was wait and hope that their little camera would reveal something worth seeing. Back in the lab, they set up a workstation to review the footage. The anticipation was almost unbearable. Would they find proof of an afterlife? Evidence of some kind of consciousness lingering after death? Or would the screen remain blank, mocking their efforts? Ryan plugged the camera into a computer and started the playback. At first there was nothing but darkness, just blackness filling the screen. Then suddenly a faint noise crackled through the speakers, a low, indistinct hum. Laura leaned closer, her heart racing. Could it be? Was this the beginning of something incredible? As the seconds ticked by, the hum grew louder, more distinct. It sounded almost like voices, overlapping and unintelligible. Ryan adjusted the volume, trying to make sense of it, but no matter how hard they listened, the words remained elusive. Then, just when they thought they might have imagined the whole thing, something else appeared on the screen. A faint glow. Barely noticeable at first, it flickered and pulsed like a heartbeat. Slowly, it grew brighter, illuminating the inside of the coffin. Laura gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Ryan didn't answer. He was too busy zooming in on the image, trying to get a clearer view. The glow seemed to emanate from somewhere near Daniel's chest, but it wasn't coming from any external source. There was no logical explanation for it. For a moment, neither of them moved. They simply stared at the screen, mesmerized and terrified in equal measure. Whatever they had captured, it defied logic. It challenged everything they thought they knew about life, death, and the boundaries between worlds. And deep down, they both knew one thing for certain: this was only the beginning. The lab was silent except for the soft hum of the computer running the footage. Laura and Ryan sat side by side, their eyes glued to the screen. The faint glow inside the coffin continued to pulse rhythmically, almost like a heartbeat. It was mesmerizing yet unsettling at the same time. Neither of them spoke. The weight of what they were seeing pressed down on them like a heavy blanket. "What do you think it is?" Laura finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She didn't look away from the screen, afraid she might miss something important. Ryan shook his head slowly. "I don't know," he admitted, his brow furrowed as he leaned closer to the monitor. "It's not coming from any external source. There's nothing in that coffin that could produce this kind of light." Laura nodded, though her mind raced with possibilities. Could it be some kind of chemical reaction? A trick of the camera? Or something else entirely? She hesitated to voice her thoughts aloud, worried they might sound ridiculous. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that they had stumbled upon something extraordinary. "Let's keep watching," Ryan said, breaking the silence. He adjusted the playback speed slightly, slowing it down to catch every detail. As the footage progressed, the glow grew brighter, illuminating more of the coffin's interior. Shadows danced across the walls, shifting and twisting in ways that didn't seem natural. Laura squinted at the screen. "Wait, look at that." She pointed to one corner of the frame where a shadow seemed to stretch unnaturally, forming what looked like the outline of a figure. It was hazy and indistinct, but there was no denying its presence. Ryan froze the image and zoomed in. The shadowy shape became clearer, though still difficult to make out. It appeared humanoid with long limbs and a vaguely defined head. But instead of solid features, it was composed entirely of swirling darkness, like smoke caught in a breeze. "This doesn't make sense," Ryan muttered under his breath. He ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. "There's no way this is just interference or a glitch. This is real." Laura felt a chill run down her spine. "Do you think it's him?" she asked cautiously. She didn't need to say Daniel's name. They both knew who she meant. Ryan shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe it's something else entirely. We can't jump to conclusions yet." They continued analyzing the footage, pausing and rewinding repeatedly, to examine every frame. The longer they watched, the more anomalies they noticed. Alongside the glowing light and shadowy figures, strange sounds began to emerge from the audio track. At first, it was just a low hum, similar to what they'd heard earlier, but as they listened more closely, the hum evolved into overlapping voices, faint and distorted but unmistakably human. Laura grabbed a pair of headphones and plugged them into the computer. She closed her eyes, focusing intently on the sounds. Fragments of words started to surface. Return, threshold, guardians. Each phrase sent a shiver down her spine. She pulled off the headphones and turned to Ryan. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. He nodded grimly. "Yeah, I heard it. But what does it mean? Are these actual voices or just random noise?" "I don't know," Laura admitted. "But they're definitely saying something, and whatever it is, it's not normal." Determined to uncover more, Laura suggested bringing in another expert, someone with knowledge outside their field who might offer fresh insights. Ryan agreed reluctantly, though he wasn't thrilled about involving anyone else. They decided to contact Emily Shaw, an anthropologist known for her research on ancient rituals and beliefs surrounding death. When Emily arrived at the lab the next day, Laura and Ryan briefed her on everything they had discovered so far. They showed her the footage and played the audio clips, explaining their theories and concerns. Emily listened intently, her expression unreadable. "This is fascinating," she said after a moment. Her tone was calm, but there was a spark of excitement in her eyes. These phrases, return, threshold, guardians, they remind me of mythological concepts found in many cultures. People have long believed in liminal spaces between life and death, places where souls transition from one state to another. So you think we've captured evidence of what? An afterlife? Ryan asked skeptically. Emily shrugged. Not necessarily, but it's possible that your camera has tapped into something beyond our understanding. Maybe it's not an afterlife, but a different dimension or plane of existence. Ancient texts often describe such realms as being guarded by entities tasked with maintaining balance. Her explanation left Laura feeling both intrigued and uneasy. If Emily was right, then they weren't just dealing with unexplained phenomena. They were meddling with forces far greater than themselves. Over the next few days, the team worked tirelessly to analyze the footage further. Using advanced software, they isolated the audio and attempted to translate the overlapping voices. Some fragments remained indecipherable, but others formed coherent sentences. "You must leave. The threshold is fragile. Do not disturb." Each new revelation added to the growing tension in the lab. Strange occurrences began happening around them too. Equipment malfunctioned without explanation. Lights flickered sporadically, even when no one was touching the switches. One night, Laura swore she saw a shadowy figure standing outside her office window, watching her. When she rushed to investigate, there was nothing there. Ryan dismissed these incidents as stress-induced paranoia, but Laura wasn't so sure. Something felt off, like they had awakened something they shouldn't have. Despite the mounting unease, they pressed on. Their curiosity outweighed their fear. For now. But as they delved deeper into the mystery, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that whatever they had uncovered was aware of their presence and growing restless. One evening, as they reviewed the latest batch of footage, Emily gasped suddenly. On the screen, the glowing light had intensified, filling the entire coffin with an ethereal radiance. In the center of the frame stood a figure, clearer than any they had seen before. Its form was humanoid, but its face was obscured by a veil of shimmering light. It raised an arm, pointing directly at the camera. Laura's heart skipped a beat. "Is it looking at us?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ryan didn't answer. He was frozen in place, staring at the screen with wide eyes. For the first time since the experiment began, he looked genuinely afraid. Emily broke the silence. "We need to stop," she said firmly. "Whatever this is, it's dangerous. We've gone too far." But stopping wasn't that simple. The line between science and the unknown had blurred, and now they were trapped in a web of questions with no easy answers. Deep down, Laura knew they wouldn't walk away, not until they understood what they had unleashed. And somewhere beneath the earth, in the darkness of Daniel's coffin, the glow lingered, waiting patiently for the next chapter to unfold. The decision to visit the gravesite came after days of restless debate. Laura couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial, something hidden beneath the surface, literally and figuratively. Emily had urged caution, warning them not to dig deeper into what they didn't understand. But Ryan's curiosity burned brighter than his fear, and Laura found herself torn between logic and instinct. "We can't just sit here," Ryan argued one evening in the lab. "If there's even a chance we're onto something real, we owe it to Daniel and to science to follow through." Laura hesitated. She knew he was right, but the unease gnawing at her gut made her hesitate. Still, she nodded reluctantly. "Okay," she said softly, "but we go together. And we don't take unnecessary risks." That night, armed with flashlights, shovels, and recording equipment, Laura and Ryan drove back to the cemetery where Daniel had been buried. The place was eerily quiet under the pale light of the moon. Shadows stretched long across the rows of headstones, and the air carried a chill that seemed to seep straight into their bones. As they approached Daniel's grave, Laura's breath caught in her throat. The soil looked wrong. Fresh dirt had been pushed aside, forming a small mound near the edge of the plot. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable unless you were looking for it, but someone, or something, had been digging here. Ryan crouched down, brushing away loose dirt with his gloved hand. Beneath the surface, the corner of the coffin peeked through, splintered and cracked. "This wasn't us," he murmured, glancing up at Laura. His voice was tight with unease. "No," Laura agreed, her heart pounding. "It wasn't." They exchanged a glance, both thinking the same thing. Whatever was happening, it wasn't confined to the footage anymore. Something, or someone, was actively involved now. Without another word, they began digging. Each shovel of dirt felt heavier than the last, not because of its weight, but because of the dread building inside them. As they worked, the silence around them grew oppressive. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, leaving only the sound of their labored breathing and the scrape of metal against earth. Finally, after what felt like hours, the coffin lid came into view. It was damaged worse than they'd expected, with deep gouges marking its surface. Someone, or something, had tried to break through. Laura stared at it, her mind racing. Was this vandalism? Or had Daniel's body somehow caused the damage from within? Ryan pried open the lid with trembling hands. Inside, instead of Daniel's remains, they found Emily Shaw. She lay unconscious, her face pale and drawn, clutching a leather-bound journal to her chest. Her clothes were torn and muddy as though she'd been dragged through the dirt. Laura gasped and dropped to her knees beside her. "Emily," she called, shaking her gently. "Emily, wake up." After a moment, Emily stirred, groaning softly. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy. When she saw Laura and Ryan leaning over her, recognition dawned slowly. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered hoarsely. Her voice was weak, barely audible. "What happened?" Ryan demanded, helping her sit up. He glanced around nervously, half expecting something to leap out of the shadows. "Why are you here?" Emily shook her head, wincing in pain. "I followed the clues," she said, gripping the journal tightly. "I thought I could help. I thought I could reason with them." "Them?" Laura echoed, her stomach twisting. "Who's them?" Emily hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. "Guardians," she finally said. "Beings who protect the threshold between worlds. They warned me to leave, to destroy the camera and forget everything, but I didn't listen." She looked down at the journal in her lap, opening it to reveal pages filled with frantic scribbles and crude sketches. "They showed me things I can't explain." Laura took the journal from her hands, skimming through the notes. There were diagrams of strange symbols, descriptions of encounters with shadowy figures, and detailed observations about the glowing light captured on camera. One entry stood out. The threshold is fragile. Crossing it disrupts balance. Consequences unknown but dire. This is insane, Ryan muttered, pacing back and forth. We're dealing with forces we don't understand. We should never have started this. But we did. Laura countered sharply, her voice rising. And now we can't stop. Not until we know the truth. Emily grabbed her arm, her grip surprisingly strong despite her frail appearance. You don't understand, she said urgently. They're watching us. They've been watching us since the beginning. If we push too far, they'll act, and we won't survive it. Her words sent a shiver down Laura's spine, but she refused to back down. Then tell us what to do, she said firmly. How do we fix this? Emily sighed, her shoulders slumping, in defeat. Destroy the footage. Bury the camera. Apologize. Make it clear we're done interfering. For a long moment, no one spoke. The weight of Emily's warning hung heavy in the air. Finally, Ryan broke the silence. All right, he said quietly. Let's pack everything up and get out of here. We'll deal with the rest tomorrow. They helped Emily to her feet and gathered their tools, moving quickly and silently. As they left the cemetery, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She glanced over her shoulder repeatedly, but the shadows remained, still hiding whatever secrets they held. Back at the lab, they destroyed the original footage, erasing every trace of the experiment from their computers. The camera itself was dismantled piece by piece, its components scattered and rendered useless. Though they never published their findings, the experience left an indelible mark on all of them. In the weeks that followed, life returned to some semblance of normalcy. Emily disappeared shortly after the incident, leaving behind only the journal as proof she'd ever been there. Laura and Ryan avoided discussing what had happened, burying their memories alongside the remnants of the project. But late at night, when the lab was empty and the hum of machinery faded into silence, Laura often found herself staring at the blank screens. She wondered if they had truly uncovered proof of an afterlife, or if they had merely disturbed something humanity wasn't meant to witness. And deep underground, in the darkness of Daniel's empty coffin, the faint glow lingered, waiting patiently for the next curious soul brave enough to seek answers. Laura couldn't sleep. It had been weeks since they destroyed the footage and dismantled the camera, yet the memory of what they had uncovered haunted her every waking moment, and even her dreams. She found herself drawn back to the lab late, at night, unable to resist the pull of unanswered questions. The journal Emily had left behind sat untouched on her desk, its worn cover whispering secrets she wasn't sure she wanted to hear. But tonight, curiosity got the better of her. She opened the journal carefully as if afraid it might bite. The first few pages were filled with Emily's neat handwriting, detailing her initial observations about the glowing light and the strange voices captured by the camera. As Laura flipped further, however, the entries grew more frantic, the handwriting jagged and hurried. One passage caught her eye. They're not human. They don't think like we do. Their world isn't bound by our rules. They guard something ancient, something sacred. Crossing into their realm disrupts balance, not just for us, but for everything. Laura frowned, tracing the words with her finger. What did Emily mean by balance? And what exactly were these guardians protecting? She turned the page and froze. There, sketched in shaky lines, was a figure identical to the one they had seen in the coffin footage, humanoid veiled in shimmering light, with an arm raised as if pointing directly at her. Beneath the drawing, Emily had written, "They know I'm watching. They've followed me here. I can feel them." A chill ran down Laura's spine. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see someone, or something, standing behind her. But the lab was empty, save for the faint hum of idle machines. Still, the feeling of being watched lingered, pressing against her like a weight. She kept reading. Later entries described encounters Emily claimed to have had with the guardians after leaving the cemetery. According to the journal, they hadn't harmed her. but they had made their presence known. Lights flickered when she entered certain rooms. Objects moved without explanation. Once she swore she heard whispers calling her name from the shadows. The final entry sent a jolt of fear through Laura's chest. They want the threshold closed. If it stays open, they'll act. I don't know what that means, but I can feel it coming. Something terrible is waiting on the other side. Her hands trembled as she closed the journal. For all their efforts to bury the project, it seemed they hadn't gone far enough. Whatever they had awakened or disturbed was still out there watching, waiting. The next morning, Laura called Ryan into the lab. He arrived looking tired, his usual confidence replaced by a quiet unease. When she showed him the journal, his expression darkened. "This is bad," he said simply, running a hand through his hair. "Really bad." "What do you think she meant by closing the threshold?" Laura asked, pacing nervously. "Do you think it's connected to the camera? Or something else?" Ryan hesitated. "Maybe both. Think about it. The camera acted like a window, right? A way to peek into whatever world those guardians are protecting. Maybe destroying it wasn't enough. Maybe we need to do something more." "Like what?" Laura snapped, frustration bubbling over. "We don't even know what we're dealing with." "I don't know," Ryan shot back, his voice rising. "But sitting around isn't going to help. If Emily's right, if these things are planning to act, we need to figure out how to stop them." Laura sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. She felt trapped between two impossible choices: ignore the warnings and hope for the best, or dive deeper into the mystery and risk making things worse. Neither option felt safe. Over the next few days, they scoured the lab for anything that might offer clues. They revisited the original data from the camera, analyzing every frame and audio clip for details they might have missed. Slowly, patterns began to emerge. The glowing light, the shadowy figures, the overlapping voices, they all seemed to revolve around a central theme: transition. Movement from one state to another, from life to death, or perhaps from one dimension to the next. "It's like a doorway," Laura murmured one evening, staring at a freeze frame of the glowing Coffin interior. "Not just any doorway, a gateway between worlds." Ryan nodded, slowly, and we pried it open without knowing what was on the other side. The realization hit them simultaneously. Closing the threshold meant sealing the gateway. But how? And at what cost? Their breakthrough came unexpectedly. While reviewing old research notes, Laura stumbled upon a reference to ancient rituals designed to close the veil between realms. Many cultures believed that specific actions, chanting, burning herbs, creating protective symbols, could restore balance when boundaries were breached. Could such practices work in this case? It was a long shot, but they didn't have many options left. Together, they pieced together a makeshift ritual based on the information they could find. They gathered materials: candles, salt, incense, and chalk for drawing symbols on the floor. Then, late one night, they returned to the cemetery where it had all begun. The air was colder than before, biting at their skin as they approached Daniel's grave. The soil still bore the scars of their earlier excavation, though nature had started to reclaim the site. Laura knelt beside the plot, sketching intricate patterns on the ground while Ryan lit the candles and arranged them in a circle. When everything was ready, they stood in the center of the circle, holding hands. Laura took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "Here goes nothing," she whispered. Ryan nodded grimly. "Let's hope this works." They began chanting the words they'd found in an old text, their voices trembling but determined. The incense smoke swirled around them, thickening until it obscured their vision. At first, nothing happened, but then the ground beneath them trembled slightly as if responding to their efforts. From the shadows beyond the candlelight, shapes began to form. Tall, indistinct figures emerged, their forms shifting and flickering like smoke. One stepped forward closer than the others, its veiled face tilted toward them. Though no sound came from it, Laura felt its presence like a physical force, heavy and oppressive. "You shouldn't have come here." A voice echoed in her mind, low and resonant. It wasn't spoken aloud, but she understood it perfectly. "We didn't mean to disturb you," Laura replied, surprising herself with her courage. "We only wanted answers. Please, tell us how to close the threshold." The figure paused, seemingly considering her plea. Then, without warning, the ground shook violently. The candles toppled, extinguishing the circle of light. Darkness swallowed them whole. When the shaking subsided, Laura and Ryan found themselves alone once more. The figures were gone, and the air felt lighter, almost peaceful. Had it worked? Or had they angered the guardians further? As they packed up their belongings and prepared to leave, Laura noticed something etched into the dirt near Daniel's grave. It was a symbol, one they hadn't drawn themselves. Simple yet powerful, it seemed to pulse faintly with residual energy. Ryan stared at it, his brow furrowed. "What does it mean?" Laura shook her head, though a small sense of relief washed over her. "I think it means we're done here." They walked away from the cemetery, leaving the symbol behind. Whether it marked the end of their ordeal or merely the beginning of something new, neither of them could say. But as they drove back to the lab, the oppressive weight that had hung over them for weeks finally lifted. For now, at least, the threshold was closed. The drive back to the lab was silent, but it wasn't the tense silence they had shared before. This time there was a sense of closure, however fragile it might be. Laura stared out the passenger window, watching the world blur past as the first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon. She felt lighter, as though a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying had finally been lifted. Still, questions lingered in her mind. "Do you think it's really over?" Ryan asked suddenly, breaking the quiet. Laura hesitated before answering. "I don't know," she admitted. "But something tells me we've done enough, for now." Ryan nodded slowly, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. "Let's hope so. I don't think either of us could handle another round of whatever that was." They didn't talk much after that, each lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived at the lab, they packed away the remaining equipment and tidied up the space. It was symbolic, almost ritualistic, like putting an end to a chapter of their lives they would never fully understand. By the time they finished, the sun had risen higher, filling the room with warm light. Over the next few days, life began to return to normal, or as close to normal as it could get. After everything they'd experienced, Laura threw herself into mundane tasks, trying to distract herself from the memories of glowing lights, shadowy figures, and whispered warnings. Ryan did the same, burying himself in unrelated research projects. Neither of them mentioned the experiment or the events that followed, but deep down they both knew they couldn't forget. The journal Emily had left behind still sat on Laura's desk, its pages filled with cryptic notes and unsettling sketches. She avoided looking at it, yet she couldn't bring herself to throw it away. Something about it felt important, like a reminder of how close they had come to crossing a line they barely understood. One evening, as Laura stayed late in the lab working on a report, she noticed something odd. The computer monitor flickered briefly, then went dark. She frowned, reaching for the power button to restart it. But before she could touch it, the screen lit up again, not with her usual desktop background, but with a grainy image of the Coffin interior. Her heart skipped a beat. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "This can't be happening." On the screen, the familiar glow pulsed softly, casting eerie shadows across the walls of the coffin. Then, slowly, a figure emerged from the darkness. It was humanoid, its form obscured by shimmering veils of light. Unlike before, this time the figure didn't point or gesture. It simply stood there, watching. Laura stumbled backward, nearly knocking over her chair. She wanted to call out for Ryan, but her voice caught in her throat. The figure didn't move, but its presence filled the room, pressing against her like a physical force. She could feel its gaze even though its face remained hidden. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the image vanished. The monitor returned to its normal state, displaying her unfinished report as if nothing had happened. Laura stood frozen, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Had she imagined it? Was it some kind of residual effect from the camera footage? Or had the threshold reopened? She didn't have answers, and she wasn't sure she wanted them. The next morning, she told Ryan what had happened. He listened quietly, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he sighed deeply. "Maybe we should check the cemetery again," he suggested reluctantly. Just to be sure. Though neither of them liked the idea, they agreed it was necessary. That afternoon, they returned to the gravesite, half expecting to find fresh disturbances or signs of activity. Instead, the area looked peaceful, untouched since their last visit. The symbol etched into the soil was still there, faintly glowing in the sunlight. Laura knelt beside it, running her fingers lightly over the markings. "It's still here," she murmured. "Does that mean the threshold is closed?" Ryan shrugged. "Hard to say, but if those guardians wanted to hurt us, they've had plenty of chances. Maybe this is their way of saying it's okay, for now." As they stood there, taking in the quiet serenity of the cemetery, Laura felt a strange mix of relief and unease. They had done all they could to make things right, but she knew they were only scratching the surface of something far greater than themselves. Whatever lay beyond the threshold, it was vast, ancient, and incomprehensible. Before leaving, Laura glanced back at the grave one last time. In the distance, she thought she saw a shadow move among the trees, fleeting and indistinct. She blinked and it was gone. Shaking off the feeling, she climbed into the car and drove away with Ryan. Back at the lab, they made a silent agreement. The project was officially over. They wouldn't speak of it again, not to each other or anyone else. The footage was destroyed, the camera dismantled, and the journal locked away in a drawer where it would gather dust. For the sake of their sanity, and perhaps their safety, they decided to let sleeping dogs lie. But late at night, when the lab was empty and the hum of machinery faded into silence, Laura often found herself staring at the blank screens. She wondered if they had truly uncovered proof of an afterlife, or if they had merely disturbed something humanity wasn't meant to witness. And deep underground, in the darkness of Daniel's empty coffin, the faint glow lingered, waiting patiently for the next curious soul brave enough to seek answers.